Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for your time today. Over the years, I've had clients tell me that their doctors, teachers, speech and language therapists, and so on say that nutrition isn't going to make any difference to autism symptoms and that you should just get your child to eat whatever they want rather than nothing at all. Okay, so first of all, I would like to recognize that the idea of using food as medicine may be the last thing on your mind if you have a so-called picky eater at home. But hopefully by the end of this presentation, you will have some insight into what lies at the root of some of these challenges that you can maybe see some ways to overcome them. So rather than dwell on sensory issues around this so-called picky eating, which would be a whole talk all on its own, I'm going to focus on something called nutrigenomics, but in a way that keeps it light and accessible, not least because I'm a functional medicine practitioner, not a geneticist. So what we're going to do is look at metabolism, which is basically how your food is broken down and what happens between putting it into your mouth and converting it into a usable form of energy, and how this process may differ in someone who's autistic that could then lead to differences in behaviour and communication and focus and concentration. So once we've done that, then we'll look at some unique challenges faced by people with autism with regard to their ability to detoxify from certain substances and how this too can lead to imbalances in neurotransmitters, which will also affect mood and behavior. Because let's remember that autism is it's more descriptive than diagnostic. There's not one specific gene that causes autism. Diagnosis is based rather on behavior and on certain traits. But if that's the case, and there are certain things that we know affect neurotransmitter pathways, then does that mean that maybe we can influence the more challenging aspects of autism, such as meltdowns, mood swings, focus and attention, communication, and interaction? So this is what we're going to look at today. My name's Simone Buna, and I'm Director of Barefoot Medicine Limited. I'm also a Senior Associate at the Royal Society of Medicine, and I'm a member of the Institute for Functional Medicine. I've got a couple of undergraduate degrees and postgraduate qualifications, and I'm a licensed acupuncturist and herbalist, and I've got around about 25 years experience in natural healthcare. But prior to that, I worked in the corporate world for multinational companies in the HR and training department and also in public relations. But now I would describe myself as a functional medicine health strategist. I've also qualified in permaculture design. I'm a herbalist, TCM practitioner, that's traditional Chinese medicine, and I'm a nutritional therapist. But really, all of those bits of paper just mean that I'm absolutely passionate about finding ways that we can all live a healthier life using natural solutions and lifestyle medicine. And that may sound naive, but you know what? Science is now catching up with what Hippocrates meant when he said, "Let thy food be thy medicine." And I call this the science of nutrigenomics. So today I'm going to explain the very basics of this complex topic. And I'll begin by using a case study and then converting that into an example that we can all relate to. So one of my clients was a lady who loved to cook. She was a really good cook and she was a stay-at-home mum, and she ensured all her family ate fresh, home-cooked food. They went for walks together. Her son is autistic and they go to the park every day for fresh air. She reads to him a lot. But from the age of about 4 onwards, and he's 7 now, his choice of food became more and more restricted. And so in his case, it was actually homemade chicken nuggets. But I'm going to give you an example of a food that more of you will be able to relate to when it comes to having a child who wants more and more of the same thing. And actually, it's perhaps not just the children who want this either. So who has got a cheese monster at home? Whether it's cheese sandwiches for lunch, or maybe the topping on pizza, or foods with melted cheese over the top. Yeah, even the thought of it is making me hungry. But let's take a look at what happens inside our body. So kind of behind the scenes look at what happens when we eat cheese, and specifically what happens when someone with autism eats cheese. When we eat cheese, there's a protein in it called casein, and that breaks down or metabolizes into casomorphin, which, as the name suggests, is an opioid-like compound, casomorphine. So this process does occur in everyone, but genetic differences in individuals with autism alter how their body handles casomorphine, and it tends to make them a lot more sensitive to its opioid-like effects. So you can think of this in many ways. So, for example, you may have heard of the opioid crisis regarding the overprescription of opioid-based painkillers, or maybe you think about diamorphine when it's given in hospitals. But let's imagine the same effects, but on a smaller but ongoing scale, like a regular drip feed. So these are compounds that are attached to dopamine receptors to block pain signals. So if, for example, you have a child who is self-harming, it's possible that they're not actually experiencing the pain in the same way as neurotypical people do. As an aside, I would add that there are often other genetic differences that can make people with autism much more sensitive to pain. So please bear in mind that this cheese example is just one tiny and very simplified aspect of a much broader, very complex sequence of events. Okay, so we've got cheese, and the protein in cheese is called casein, and that breaks down into casomorphine, which is an opioid-like substance. Okay, now we're going to talk about a gene called MTHFR because that plays a crucial role in detoxification. But in individuals with autism, genetic alterations called polymorphisms in MTHFR can lead to something called impaired methylation as well as impaired detoxification. And all that means is it's difficult for the body to remove toxins, including casomorphine, which means that the casomorphine can accumulate in the body over time. The more you eat, the more it accumulates. And then the effects of it, these opioid-like effects, can increase over time. Excuse me. So as a functional medicine practitioner, I look at body symptoms and how they're, at body systems and how they're functioning behind the scenes. So here's an example of what I see in autistic children when I'm looking at their lab reports and what's called the detoxification markers. So here's the examples from two different people with autism from two reports that I've had back. You'll see on there that there's glutathione mentioned. You may have heard of that as well. It's a really important antioxidant that the body makes for itself. Some people who are either the parents of a child who's autistic or even autistic people themselves may supplement, may take glutathione supplements, and some people absolutely swear by it because it can really help to detoxify the system. But this is where the benefit of personalized healthcare comes into play. Because on the top report, you can see that this person has good glutathione markers, and the gut metabolism looks good, but there are very clear indications that there's a problem with methylation and also the body's ability to detoxify itself. In the second case, you can see that there's a glutathione deficiency, so we know that the body's not detoxifying properly. But to make that worse, there's a very marked gut imbalance as well as poor methylation. So these two results, all you need to think about them really is that one person would definitely benefit from supplementation with glutathione, but the other person would not. And so while one person's main focus is digestive health, the other person's already got good digestion. And so we need to look at what is going to work for each individual. And this is why there's no one size fits all solution to treating people with autism. And it's also why your doctor can't give you dietary advice. It's not just because they don't study nutrition, it's because everyone's needs are different. Okay, so we know that if we eat the cheese, then it breaks down into morphine-like substances that we cannot get rid of properly from our body. Okay, great. What next? Well, as I mentioned earlier, casomorphine binds to opioid receptors in the gut, which then triggers an increase in inflammation as well as increased permeability of the gut lining. So you may have heard of leaky gut syndrome. Well, this is it. What it means is that toxins and undigested food particles are able to leak into the bloodstream. And because they don't belong there in their undigested form, they trigger an immune response, which leads to systemic inflammation that then triggers neuroinflammation as the toxins cross the gut-brain barrier. So you may have heard of Clostridia as well. That's an opportunistic bacteria that can thrive in this kind of environment, and it's known to significantly worsen the symptoms of autism. So here's an example of the Clostridia getting out of balance. Again, this is from two different people. Some of the species of Clostridia are beneficial and they're even recognized as probiotics, so they're good for your gut, but others can become harmful. And when there's poor digestion, there's the risk of the harmful opportunistic bacteria getting out of hand. So these two sets of results from different people give you an indication of how many strains of Clostridia there are. In the top set of results, you can see that the one that's elevated is called 4-creosol, and that disrupts dopamine metabolism in the brain and is very closely associated with autism spectrum disorders. But in the second set of results, you can see that that level is low, but a different one is high, the HPHPA. And this too has been associated with autism in children, as well as various other conditions in adulthood. Now, you don't need to remember all of these different markers, but the main thing you can see is that knowing these differences and the ranges and the age and the background of the person, that will influence the type of treatment that's offered. And so by that, I mean that some people will benefit just from having probiotics to regulate their gut, but others may benefit from conventional medications such as metronidazole or vancomycin. So again, these tests, I would say at this point, are just non-invasive stool and urine samples that can be done at home and then collected by courier and taken off to the laboratory. So although the information that we gather is really state of the art, the method of collection is really quite basic. But the main thing is that once we tackle these root causes and address the dopamine metabolism, then there's a knock-on effect on mood and behavior. Okay, so far in this vicious cycle, we've got poor detoxification, then disruption of dopamine metabolism, then symptoms of autism becoming more prevalent. Okay, so what's next? Well, the increased inflammation that we've just mentioned from all the food particles and the leaky gut syndrome, coupled with genetic differences that compound the problem, coupled with poor detoxification, all leads to something called oxidative stress. Now, for anyone who likes to visualize a process, let me put it together in a way that might help you to visualize it. If you imagine the lining of the gut as a tight protective mesh that keeps toxic substances and undigested food particles from escaping into the bloodstream, then we eat foods that trigger leaky gut syndrome. It's a little bit like poking holes in that mesh. Toxic substances and undigested particles can then leak out and trigger an inflammatory response in the body. So think of inflammation like a fire that the body is trying to put out. If your body's constantly fighting inflammation, constantly firefighting, it produces something called free radicals, and they are unstable molecules that can damage cells and damage tissues. So all of this together is oxidative stress. Now that's actually a very normal process and it's part of the aging process. But again, in people with autism, the genetic predispositions can make it harder for the body to put out those fires, which leads to chronic oxidative stress, chronic inflammation. And then this can affect the brain, the gut, and other body systems, making autistic symptoms more pronounced. But again, this is something we can measure using a simple urine sample. So here you can see on this functional imbalance report, the main categories are oxidative stress, which we just spoke about, mitochondrial dysfunction, that's the energy powerhouse or the kind of the battery of nearly all the cells in the body, toxic exposure, and methylation. Now, these are all key pillars in measuring the impact of autism. You can see that each of these is scored out of 10, with 0 to 4 means there's a minimal need for intervention, 5 to 7 is moderate, and 8 plus means that that's what we're going to prioritize in the treatment. So this is the kind of information I use to help me understand people's long-term health conditions. Because although urine samples can change daily, some of these markers can take weeks or even months to change, and maybe even longer, or they're not likely to improve unless the person makes a concerted effort to address their health or to supplement or do whatever they need to do. So they can give us a lot of information about what's got us to this point and where it's likely to go if we don't address it. But, at the end of the day, you don't need a test to remind you that if you've overindulged, then you feel better after you've had a brief period of abstention from, say, alcohol or coffee or whatever it may be. So I think intuitively, we all know that certain things will make us feel better. But the reason I run these tests is so that I can prioritize what we need to address, when and how. Okay, so when I'm addressing specific health concerns, this is the kind of information that I use to get back to the root cause of it. But obviously, this is relevant to all of us, but I've chosen to specialize in working with families who have children with autism because I've seen the very real difference this can make to people's lives. Okay, so now back to our vicious cycle. As you can tell, the opioid-like effects of casomorphin can also affect dopamine and serotonin levels in the brain. This imbalance is what leads to mood swings, anxiety, repetitive behavior, and all these things, these traits that are common in autism. So the next slide I'll use to demonstrate is just an example of neurotransmitter markers in someone with autism. But please don't be put off by all the ridiculously long names of the neurotransmitters. Okay, so as I say, ignore the letters and names of the neurotransmitter metabolites in the report. The purpose of me showing you this is just to demonstrate that from a simple urine test, we can see that the markers lie way outside the healthy range. Because this is just one part of a test that I run, it actually enables me to track back through the bodily processes to see where things have gone awry. But I find this one particularly helpful when I work with children with regressive autism or in people whose condition seems to worsen over time. In many cases, even if there's a genetic factor that contributes to the autism, if we can identify other factors that are compounding the symptoms, then there's a good chance of bringing about some degree of improvement. We don't have time to go into it right now, but this result was a child who was struggling in primary school with focus and concentration. He was nonverbal, and the speech and language therapist said that altering his diet would not make any difference. Suffice to say that within 2 months, he was able to communicate his needs using pictures. Because his focus and attention improved, he became less frustrated and angry. Then his attention span increased and he was able to sit for longer. Then he was able to be taught how to use the images to express his needs. He became less aggressive towards those around him because he wasn't as frustrated. And I also believe that he had less abdominal discomfort, which could certainly have contributed to his supposed tantrums or meltdowns. But because he was nonverbal, we didn't necessarily have a way of knowing that for sure. But what I can say is if this is not addressed, then the cycle continues. Okay, the neurotransmitter imbalance remains challenged so that the person's anxiety and stress levels increase, which makes them crave something to reward them again. And as we know, the brain's reward system is triggered by the opioid-like effects of casomorphin, leading to cravings for more cheese and other dairy products. And this creates the vicious cycle as your child becomes addicted to the feeling of comfort or relaxation provided by casomorphin. The continued consumption of cheese and dairy often perpetuates this cycle, leading to more pronounced autistic symptoms such as increased anxiety, hyperactivity, sensory sensitivities as the toxins build up, and maybe digestive and abdominal discomfort, alternating constipation and diarrhea, rejection of food, maybe they don't feel comfortable in their stomach. And if we've got digestive bloating or discomfort, then of course we don't want to add more food on top of that. So you may see an increase in digestive upsets and a change in palate or a less interest in food, but this will happen over time. Okay. And I would also say that these people are likely to have very poor digestion that gets worse because of this cycle that's going on. So if you then add this cycle to somebody who may have sensory or emotional issues around going to the toilet or around having certain foods in their mouth and the texture or the smell or the taste or the color, then you can see how this whole cycle is perpetuated. And as digestion worsens, they're going to be more prone to leaky gut syndrome, which will trigger more inflammation. It will trigger weight gain. There will be more food sensitivities, which may make people less likely to have an interest in food. And in nonverbal children, of course, there may be abdominal pain that they're unable to express or even understand. And this can lead to some children, for example, throwing themselves over the arm of a chair or something else that will put pressure on their abdomen as they try to push the food through an inflamed or sluggish digestive tract. Okay, so now you've seen a very, very simplified version of this vicious cycle. So let's break it down into some key takeaways that you will be able to remember. Firstly, we can see that there may be a propensity to become more addicted to foods that are actually detrimental to health. Secondly, we can see that poor digestion can lead to a decreased ability to get the nutrients from the food and make it more likely to harbour opportunistic gut infections that can cross over the gut-brain barrier, causing neuroinflammation and neurotoxicity that makes the symptoms of autism more pronounced. And thirdly, there's lifestyle factors that will obviously have an adverse effect on neurotransmitters. So there's an obvious solution emerging here, isn't there? It needs to be a solution that how we can best support the neurotransmitters. Is there something we can do to support them? Well, the low-hanging fruit here is diet and lifestyle. But as I said at the beginning, knowing that is one thing, but making these changes in practice is another if you have somebody who has a reduced palate. So how are we going to break it down into manageable and achievable chunks? So I would suggest that we look at 4 pillars of healthy nutrition for people with autism. And we can break it down into detoxification. Let's find a way to get rid of the rubbish in the gut that has already accumulated. Let's have a good detoxification process. The next process, I would say, would be to reduce inflammation, right? So let's stop adding to the problem. It's time to stop eating pro-inflammatory foods. The next option is supplementation. So if there's a genetic polymorphin or polymorphism that means that you're unable to metabolize certain nutrients, again, getting a bit tongue-tied here. If there are genetic polymorphisms that mean that you're unable to metabolize certain nutrients, then supplementing accordingly will help to overcome that short circuit. And finally, personalization. I'm sure you're all more than familiar with the old maxim, if you've met one person with autism, you've met one person with autism. Well, the same goes for the solution. If there was a one-size-fits-all solution, then you can bet your life that Big Pharma would have patented it and they would be selling it to you for a massively inflated price. The reality is that your biochemical needs are as unique as you are, so the solution is as well. This is why I'm sharing the principles with you rather than giving you a quick fix. So knowing what you want to achieve from your food, these 4 pillars, will help you to make better food choices from today forwards. But we need to kind of clarify that a bit more and break it down into what that means. You know what you want to achieve. So let's break it down into how to achieve it. So the first point I raised was detoxification. If toxins cannot be eliminated from your body, in other words, if you can't poo it out, pee it out, sweat it out, spit it out, then your body has an amazing mechanism that actually encases the toxin in fat and stores it where it can do the least amount of damage to the vital organs. So what it does is it deposits it under the skin, which obviously leads to weight gain. If, however, you detoxify too rapidly, especially in someone who's sensitive, then the body gets flooded with toxins faster than it can remove them. So symptoms can appear to get worse. Plus, the body may react by trying to take on more fat urgently to encase the toxins again. So the first thing to accept is that this will be and needs to be a gradual process. We need to find out what is causing you to have poor detoxification. As you saw from the test results, some people have a genetic imbalance that means that they would benefit from supplementing with glutathione, which is the body's main antioxidant. But then we have the issue that sometimes people with autism are unable to take tablets. So in this case, I would use either a cream or I would have parents put patches between the shoulder blades. These options don't require any disruption to your daily routine, but it can immediately begin to help with the detoxification, which will in turn reduce inflammation. And before we move on to inflammation, there's just a quick reminder, of course, that our body is constantly detoxifying, not just from our food, but from our environment. This can include glyphosate from the food chain, but also which is commonly used in weed killer. There's arsenic in the wood supply. There's mercury from some fish or shellfish. And of course, mold from damp environments, including in the home. If you live in an old property or one that suffers from damp, then there will be spores that the body's constantly detoxifying from as well. So exposure to any or all of these toxins may not result in symptoms right away, because a strong immune system can detoxify the body. However, if you have a weakened immune system and sluggish detoxification systems, then toxins gradually accumulate over time. So the trigger and the symptoms can sometimes be quite far apart. And this is why detoxifying your body gently on a daily basis by consuming phytonutrients, so fruit and vegetables, organic obviously, is a great start to reduce any health risks. So this report here is just an example of some of the toxins that I test for using a hair strand sample. So you cut a lock of hair and send it off to the laboratory, and hair acts a bit like our organs do, in that, if it takes you 2 months to grow hair to the length that it is, it will keep a record of 2 months worth of exposure to toxins. So this is a really useful test, actually, that gives us a longer term picture. Okay, so the inability to detoxify from these environmental toxins and also dietary triggers the next pillar of using food as medicine, which is inflammation. Inflammation is an immune response to something. So just as you'd see your arm go red and inflamed if you brush against nettles, for example, so would you see inflammation inside your digestive tract if you could peer inside your body. So the obvious thing is stop adding to the problem. If your bath's overflowing, you don't want to keep bailing it out. You want to turn the tap off. So this means getting rid of foods that trigger inflammation, which essentially means getting rid of gluten, dairy, and casein, sometimes soy as well. And it definitely means no ultra-processed foods. Now, of course, as I recognized in the beginning, dietary change is difficult for any of us, and it does require a lot of planning, support, and guidance, which is why you may want a health coach to keep you on track. It's a little bit like me having a trainer in the gym. I can go it alone, I can turn up at the gym, but I'm much more likely to get results if someone is there guiding, supporting, and holding me accountable as well. Another way of reducing inflammation is, of course, to identify any food intolerance. So you may want to consider doing a food intolerance test, which is a finger prick blood spot test. And the other thing you can do, of course, is keep a mood and food journal if you don't want to do the tests. Because if you keep a journal, it'll help you to identify whether or not you have an intolerance, a sensitivity, or hopefully not an allergy to certain foods or groups of foods. The benefit of this is that some foods may not cause an immediate and obvious reaction, but they can build up inflammation over time. So there's lots of these tests available online, but as a functional medicine practitioner, the one that I use is only for healthcare professionals because it gauges different levels of immune response. So that means I can spot triggers that may not be causing obvious outward symptoms when you eat it, but it is actually having an impact behind the scenes. But as I said, you don't have to do these tests to begin to make improvements. So, for example, you can avoid ultra processed foods at all costs, avoid environmental toxins. Now, this isn't just about pesticides outside, it's also things like plastics in the home. Okay. If you use a microwave, use glass rather than Tupperware or plastic, because when you heat those up, the chemicals or the plastics can actually leach out of the plastic and into your food. So ideally, your goal is to introduce more fresh organic fruit and vegetables. And you saw from the lab result test how important that is for improving all bodily functions. But I know that changing the diet of someone who's autistic is not always easy, especially if there is this addiction to cheese or to ultra-processed foods. So that brings us on to the third thing that you can do at home, which is supplementation. Supplementation has many benefits. Firstly, it provides kind of low-hanging fruit to address health concerns, especially if it's something that's due to a genetic variation that prevents somebody from metabolizing their food adequately. In many cases, people with autism are reluctant to change or to try something new, or even to take supplements or anything with a displeasing texture or taste. So this is where we need to get creative, but we will come on to that shortly with some comments from parents that I've worked with in the past. As I said, ideally, you do need to increase organic fruit and vegetables, but there are certain foods that will support your body to detoxify gently. The main ones that you can see are fruit and vegetables. So we're looking for foods that are rich in antioxidants. And so what I found with regard to supplements is that there's one set of supplements that I use, which is fruit and vegetables in a capsule. And it's really helpful because there's a Healthy Starts for Families plan, which basically means that I can work with parents as well as with the child, because for every adult who orders their own supplements, they can nominate a child to receive theirs free of charge via this Healthy Starts for Families program. So all you need to do is answer some questions about your child's health before you start taking them, and then again after 4 months. So if anybody's interested in the Healthy Starts for Families program, it's fruit and vegetables in a capsule. Any adult who takes it can then nominate a child to receive theirs for free. So that child would be aged between 4 and 18 in some countries and 21 in other countries. So just scan this QR code if you want to find out more. So as you've seen throughout the presentation, everyone is individual. And while there are some overall guidelines for everyone, to get the best results and the fastest improvement, you do need to be able to see behind the scenes to find out which nutrients your body is missing. So ideally, you want to know what's missing and what you can do about it. And this is true whether the cause is dietary or genetic or environmental, whatever it may be. Because even if it's genetic, remember that epigenetics shows us that your genes are not your destiny as previously thought. Because the activation or suppression of many genes or silencing of them is influenced by the biochemical environment in which those genes are bathed. Now, obviously, food is not the answer to everything by any stretch of the imagination. But given that we all have to eat every day, why not choose to eat foods that can heal rather than harm? And when it comes to working with families who have a child with autism, I tend to focus on certain core tests to help us personalize this report and know where to begin. So this personalization is these are the three core tests, but I would say there are 8 go-tos that I have, but these are the main ones. You may have heard of the organic acids test, and that gives me information about neurotransmitters, oxidative stress, nutritional markers, and much, much more. I would say that this is the real go-to test that I would recommend above anything else. Next are 2 tests that benefit everyone. And I do group coaching programs for families if you want to look at family health and stressed out parents, because these, I think, are just tests that benefit all of us. Firstly, the metabolic test will help you to find out whether you're actually getting the right nutrients that your body systems need in order to function correctly. And then alongside that, you could do a comprehensive gut function test, which says, if you are getting the right nutrients, are you able to actually break them down, absorb them, and use the nutrients where they are needed and when they are needed? So this is the core of what functional medicine is about and what functional nutrition is all about. Treating symptoms doesn't work. In functional medicine, we focus on body systems. So, armed with the knowledge of what we want to achieve in an ideal world, let's have a look at the practicalities. So, I don't need to tell the parents of any autistic child about how challenging it can be to change any food or any routine. But hopefully, by understanding the body processes and that it's all a vicious cycle, you may be able to identify where the easiest point is for you to break into that cycle and start to turn it around. So here's just some creative solutions that some of the families I work with have successfully implemented. One is from a mum with a 5-year-old boy who was absolutely good as gold, but he wouldn't eat anything other than chicken nuggets, as I mentioned before. He had zero interest in food. He was non-verbal. And as a keen cook with a very good understanding of the role of nutrition, his mum contacted me absolutely at her wit's end. She's the lady I told you about before who began the Healthy Starts for Families. So she purchased her own fruit and vegetable capsules, and her son was given the gummies free of charge. Now, he didn't like the texture and he refused to eat them. So she tried bribery, she tried rewards, but nothing worked. Then she found out that if she dissolved the gummies in water, then as long as the beaker was opaque, he would have them. Now, because his body had been so incredibly deprived of nutrients up until that point, the improvement was very rapid and very remarkable. In fact, he even began raiding the fridge and got a sudden craving for orange juice. But from there, he went from strength to strength, and gradually we were able to introduce more supplements tailored to meet his needs. And the last time we spoke, she told me that his teachers in school had noticed a big difference in his focus and attention. And then another parent also understood the benefits of glutathione as an antioxidant. And we saw from the test results that his son was deficient in that. And his son wasn't detoxifying properly. It did seem to be a genetic issue there. And in this case, we used the glutathione patches between his shoulder blades so that he didn't really notice it and he couldn't take them off. So we began very gradually with one patch on alternate days so that the detox wouldn't be too much too fast. But then within days, his bowel movements improved, followed by his mood, then his sleeping patterns. Then he began to make more eye contact with people other than his immediate family. And then he even started to show an interest in the world around him. Actually, all of these cases are children who were either nonverbal or who had severe communication difficulties. So this final case then was someone who was able to take the capsules, but found it easier to use powders so that we could begin with a very small amount mixed into food in a way that didn't actually alter the taste or the texture. And then we gradually built up the amount of powders in the food. So, of course, the thing to remember is that it is always more difficult in the beginning when you're trying to break habits. But as the results start to show, you will find that compliance improves because your child is actually getting the nutrients that they need. Okay, I've given you an awful lot of information this afternoon, much of which may be new to me. So let's break it down into things that you can do at home, starting right away. Firstly, let's improve the detoxification processes. Okay, reduce exposure to environmental or household toxins like plastic containers in the microwave. If there's any damp or mold in your home, then look at getting a dehumidifier, especially for the rooms that you spend a lot of time in, so the living room or the bedroom. And most of all, increase filtered water intake because you need water to flush through your system to help wash everything out. Physical exercise we haven't mentioned, but that's also a vital part of detoxification of any kind because raising the heart rate will pump the toxins out of the body. Remember that the lymphatic system does not have its own pump. It relies on a raised heart rate. So in addition to that, exercise engages the core muscles, which will help to trigger peristalsis and propel stagnant food through the body. So in people who've got impaired movement, it is worth finding out how to perform abdominal massage because that also makes a big difference. And within a short period of time, you will develop a sensitivity to feeling which parts of the gut are stuck. This is especially helpful with nonverbal or young children who may not be able to tell you if they have digestive upsets. Okay, next you need to reduce inflammation. And if there is only one thing that you take away from today's talk, it's this: eliminate gluten, casein, and ultra processed foods. There's different ways to do this. You could try eliminating things from one meal. So begin with gluten-free breakfasts. And then when that becomes the norm, then you go for gluten-free lunches as well, or gluten-free snacks. And just do it gently, one little bit at a time. This doesn't have to be all changed overnight. Incidentally, if you're not confident in the kitchen or you don't know what to have for meals or snacks, visit my website where you will see my online meal plans, and you can have the week's meal plan sent to you direct to your inbox every Monday, and then you can customize it. It's just drag and drop. All the recipes that you would have access to will fit in with your health goals. And so you just customize it as you want, and it tells you what you can have for each meal or for snacks, and you can print off your grocery list with the quantities, so there's really no waste there either. So go to my website, www.barefootmedicine.co.uk, and you'll find the options there under the nutrition tab. The next thing I recommend is that you start a mood and food journal so that you can identify the triggers. This just means each day writing down what the person's mood is like and what they've eaten. And then at the end of a week or a month, look back through and see which were the good days and which were the more challenging days, and then see if you can find any correlation in what had been eaten prior to the bad days or the good days. Then the next thing we mentioned is supplementation. So they can definitely give you a leg up. And that might mean the fruit and vegetable supplementation that I mentioned to you with the Healthy Starts for Families. Or it could be probiotics, prebiotics, and multivitamins and minerals. And then finally, with regard to the personalization, functional tests will help us to target deficiencies very quickly and effectively. And the functional tests can either be done with one-to-one bespoke consultations with me or in a group coaching environment so that you can get to meet other parents who are in your situation. Most families I work with also decide that they want to actually overhaul their whole family health, not just change it for one person. So that's another reason that I've started offering group coaching for families, obviously with reduced rates if there's then 2 people or more doing the tests within one family. But again, details of the next group coaching sessions are on my website under the events tab if anybody is interested. So here's my contact details. Please do email me and I will respond as quickly as possible after the show. It's not my intention to collect email addresses from you directly now because I've done that in the past and then I got home and found that I couldn't read most of them. So if you want to find out more about functional medicine for autism, please do email me. And if you want to be added to my mailing list, visit my website or book a free 15-minute discovery call for some advice. There's no obligation with that. Okay, so a lot of information there. I really appreciate your time and your interest today, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the show. Thank you very much, everybody.